It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I know that we've covered the politics of Ukraine quite a bit over the last couple of years. And what I'm kind of struck by increasingly is the kind of isolationism that reminds some people of what took place before World War II, particularly with the Republican Party. And I would love to get your thoughts
I
about.
was watching an interesting discussion with former Secretary of Defense, CIA Chief, National Security Advisor Bob Gates. He's played all those roles, and he was focused not so much on Ukraine, but on the Middle East. But he used the phrase that America has a special responsibility around the world, and and that phrase kind of has got to be the starting point, because if you believe that um, we have a set of values and strengths and have a vision about a world order, that we have a responsibility, a right to take around the world, then you look at many of these events differently. And like so many other issues we've talked about, there's not one view. There's not a consensus in this country anymore about this. There used to be more of a sense that we did have a responsibility to step in around the world where we could make a difference and save lives and support freedom and democracy. Um, and but then I got to wondering, whether it's changed all that much. And one interesting study I saw sort of categorized people at one side of the spectrum as hawks, people who want a strong defense and feel we should have an aggressive foreign policy around the world, and another set of people as doves, people who would like to not spend as much money on defense and favor diplomacy as opposed to intervention, and then the people in between, and it's about half. It's kind of breaks down to half, and this, at least the study I saw, are kind of in the middle. The interesting thing is it hasn't changed that much if you apply those terms, and at least in this study, between 2014 and 2023. The Hawks were, in 2023, in this survey, about 20% of the population. Doves were about 31%. But 10 years ago, in 2014, the numbers were 24% Hawks, 30% Doves. That's the general population, though. And what has in this study changed, the number is probably less important than the movement, are the independents. And the independents, who 10 years ago, 23% said they were hawks, more aggressive in foreign policy, now are at 11%. And I'm not a cynical person, but my guess is that those who are out there trying to figure out how to win the support of independents have taken note of this. And it's the independents that have moved more aggressively, more rapidly, I should say, perhaps, against aggressive foreign policy than either Republicans or Democrats. They're kind of in the same place. But that's on this question of isolationism, and how aggressive we are in foreign policy. I actually think that more importantly might be another concept, and that's impatience. I think the American people are increasingly less patient with anything. In fact, as I was thinking about this, I ran into one study that said, actually today, 96% of people will put a beverage or a food item in their mouth that actually burns their mouth, but they'll go ahead and do it anyway because they're impatient. They want to eat it or drink it as fast as they possibly can. Brookings did an interesting study. They looked last year specifically at Ukraine, and found that 62% of Republicans said that, they thought 1 to 2 years involvement with Ukraine was about all that we should extend ourselves. 25% of Republicans said we should be there as long as it takes. Interestingly, 31% of Democrats said 1 to 2 years in Ukraine. 51% said as long as it takes. And so it's not really hard to understand that with so many people thinking that we really should limit our exposure to these kinds of issues, that people are moving in a direction of maybe less support for Ukraine. I think that one of the great problems in the Republican Party today is that people they're just less grounded. They haven't really come to terms with that question of, does the United States have a responsibility around the world? And if we do, it's more difficult. It was one thing when were state actors, when the leader in Afghanistan invades Kuwait, President George H.W. Bush said this will not stand. And the American people got behind him. The Arab nations got behind him. And in a fairly rapid order, the Afghanistan were pushed back to the Iraqis, I'm sorry, were pushed back to Baghdad. And it's that sort of thing that I think the American people see and can support, where they see these protracted actions, as in Afghanistan or in Ukraine. They're less and less supportive. And what we really need is leadership, and what we're getting is a lot of I think politicians with their finger in the wind trying to figure out which direction it's blowing, and how they can benefit from it, which is an unfortunate situation, to be sure.
First of all, let me respond just briefly to what Craig said about the independents. I think most Americans probably are tired of what he called the long protracted wars. I mean, we went through Vietnam and then the Iraq War. So that builds up probably some resistance among independents. But I think if there's a reasonable case to be made, and there certainly is in Ukraine, a president would not have much problem building public support, or should not have it. Look, the politics of isolationism raises its ugly head from time to time. Dave, you mentioned the 1930s, when the isolationists focused on keeping us out of the European wars. It was primarily Republican senators in those days, even though there were some Democrats that went along too. Well, how did that work out? It didn't quite work out very well. And before Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt, had to go through contortions to get any aid to our allies in Europe. In a sense, I probably shouldn't delve into Republican Party history, but the isolationist era in the Republican Party came to a real end in 1952 when Eisenhower beat Bob Taft for the nomination. I remember that first ballot. It went down to the end. I was 9 years old, and I was listening to the tally on the radio. Then we went through an interesting period where Democrats were the more isolationist party because of Vietnam. Remember, in 1972, George McGovern's slogan was "Come Home, America." That didn't work out very well for the Democrats. And of course, for the Republicans, the highlight was when Craig was in the White House, when Reagan and George H.W. Bush presided over the end of the Cold War. But the party of Reagan and the Bushes is no more. Republicans, in the spell of Trump, are reverting to isolationism. And like in the 1930s, I think it's dangerous. If we let Ukraine fall, the chances go up astronomically that we will wind up in a war in Europe. But this new Republican isolationism is different. It's not ideological. It's not based on any deep beliefs. It's Pavlovian. It automatically follows whatever Donald Trump decides to spout. Trump, who Nikki Haley rightly says is acting more and more deranged every day. So to me, it's very different. It's based on this, what I think is an inexplicable subservience to Putin that Trump displays. I can't understand it. I mean, you got to believe that Putin has something on Trump that causes him to go against our allies, to support our avowed enemy. To me, it's un-American, and if he were in office, it probably would be treasonous. And it's dangerous because the National Republicans in the House and Senate blindly follow. Lindsey Graham is not one of my favorite people, and he is a chameleon, no question. But when Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio, who are two of the strongest internationalists, are defending Trump's invitation to Putin to invade NATO countries, something's wrong. No. That isn't because they've changed their ideology. It's because they have a Pavlovian response. And the House Speaker, of course, is Trump's lapdog. What's more alarming is, according to Ron Brownstein, there was a recent survey by the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations that shows now an overwhelming majority of what's left of the Republican Party supports isolationist policies. That's a complete reversal from the first years of the Trump administration. And what it means is, if Trump is reelected, there aren't going to be any generals in his White House like Kelly who will stop him from doing crazy things. And that, to me, is dangerous. I think it's hurt the Republicans. I heard this morning that in the last reporting period, Trump was down 200,000 small donors since compared to 2019, which because this would have been the last reporting period for 2023, so over 4 years. That's it was basically a third of his small donors went away, and Nikki Haley outraised him in the last period. And if you look at the turnout in the early primaries, Trump's winning about 60% of the vote, but the turnout is down. And as a quasi-incumbent, as Haley always says, 60% is not really a particularly good showing. Look, Haley is the last vestige of the Reagan-Bush Republican Party, and she'd probably be a very strong candidate in a general election. But in today's shrunken GOP, she doesn't seem to have a chance in the primaries.
Frank, I want to follow up on that because I think a couple of weeks ago, I think there was a feeling on your part that she should hang in there.
I guess it's still my hope. I think she's certainly raising a good deal of money. I do think her voice resonates with a percentage of the Republican Party as it exists today. And it's one that I would sort of would go along with, to be sure, as opposed to Trump's. I agree with what, the notion that Al discussed, in which Trump, for some reason, mysteriously has a hold on Republicans who have thought one way for most of their careers and suddenly are embracing a Trump view of the world, which is a view that almost worships at the feet of authoritarians. I mean, the Putin relationship is just inexplicable. Unless you think somehow he's an operative for Mr. Putin. But, Putin's views are easy to understand. If America's weaker, Russia's stronger. And so he'll do anything to weaken the country and has demonstrated it. And yet somehow Trump goes along with it. As Liz Cheney said, she's worried about the Putin wing of the Republican Party. And yeah, it's a great news clip, but truth be told, there are those who, by aligning with Trump's point of view, are aligning themselves with a point of view that's seemingly supportive of the role Putin is playing in the world. Again, I guess I'm taking a longer view because it's the only one that provides any comfort. This election in November will be over. Whoever wins, neither Trump nor Biden are likely to run for office again. But honestly, I can't imagine 4 years of President Trump. We didn't mention NATO. He totally has a total disregard for alliances that have protected the freedoms of people around the world for decades. It's something very hard to explain. And I think the Republican Party, as it exists today, under Trump's leadership, is just going to appeal to a narrower and narrower group of Americans. So for Nikki Haley to remain a voice in the Republican Party, I hope she's in a position, should she not become president, I hope she's in a position as a leader in the Republican Party to rebuild it with people who, think a little more broadly, are less isolationists, a little more interested in, again, the special role that I think the United States has and should play in the world.
Al, the last word goes to you.
I think Nikki Haley should hang in as long as she can. What usually forces candidates out of the race is they run out of money. She's not going to run out of money. She is becoming a better and better candidate every day. Trump has enough problems that it is possible that there will be an implosion at some point before the convention. I guess the question is, if we go through Super Tuesday and he gets all the delegates, whether any of that will matter, whether she could win in a Republican convention that's filled with Trump delegates. But she definitely ought to hang in. The ramifications of this Putin deal are enormous. I mean, and we saw another one this week when the chief source for the phony Republican impeachment effort against Joe Biden turns out to be a Soviet spy. I mean, what scares you about what's happening to the Republicans is all our guardrails are down. It makes it a lot easier for Putin when he has a direct pipeline into this House leadership. And they unquestionably take, the efforts that Putin makes with disinformation. So it's just a dangerous situation. I guarantee you, if Biden's reelected, this will be his last election. It'll be Trump's last election, too. The question is whether the next election, if Trump is reelected and is able to live 4 years, will be in 1928 or in 2028 or not.
Craig, before we close up, I have to ask both of you about how Joe Biden receives bad news when we found out that Commander has bitten 24 Secret Service agents.
Well, as one who has 3 dogs and loves all 3, I guess he must really like that dog. But that kind of behavior is, shall we say, generally considered unacceptable.
I guess maybe he thinks Commander is more protective of him than the Secret Service.
I will say this: Commander isn't very, very wise because he's biting people that carry weapons. I don't think that's such a great idea.
See you next week. Thank you all.